So finding out why and what was going on and what was underneath all of this was that in the African American community, home was a place where you were protected from whites. And so then they had that whole understanding that developed. And then they eventually had these meetings, but it led to, broader and broader understanding. And there's also another group in Mississippi that's now has been much more forward, and part of it growing out of that because the young Episcopal minister is now the bishop of Mississippi. And so, so there's some statewide leadership there in working in terms of letting the church be a place of interracial meeting and development and understanding and hearing people talk. Because, let's face it, most white people don't understand how black people think. And a lot of black people don't understand exactly how white people think because their histories are very different. And yet they have a common culture. And so I think the potential is really there if it can be energized and leadership developed for the churches, which in religion plays a very significant role in the South, to begin to, and there's already, there are many mixed congregations in the Methodist Church especially, but it's gotten more separate in the last decade or so is an impression I have, and from talking to people. Now, Emory can respond to all of that and tell me what I don't understand.
I don't know what you don't understand. That is the Alan, that is the elephant in the room, so to speak. And it has to be addressed. I don't know if the church is the right place. It is certainly one of the places. But I think at the community level is the place to start. And we cannot leave out the youth, because I think the youth are way ahead of us. You wouldn't see a better form of relationship than the football fields on Friday nights. And if they can put a team together and win a ball game, those same youth can go a long way in solving the racial divide, because they don't have the baggage that we have. Andy Young said that he didn't predict Obama could win the presidency. And he said he tried to discourage him from doing so. He said, but I realize now that I had too much baggage. I didn't even know how young people were thinking. And so for us to try to tackle that race problem, it would be more difficult than if youth did so. Kids were the ones that told their parents to vote for Obama, because they didn't have all that negative history that we have, all that old memory that we failed to reconcile. And until we reconcile, we get talking like, as Jack just alluded to in Mississippi, us old folks not going to solve it. So why don't we get some young people in this room?
We can set an example.
Well, it'll be good if we set an example, yeah, sure. It would be, I think...
We're not that old.
We're not
No, I think why can't youth and the old people get together, because the older people have the memories.
Right.
They have a different understanding, but they can also learn from each other. And one of the things that make the football teams work is, well, there was a psychologist, social psychologist at Harvard many years ago, and I forget his name. But he had 4 characteristics, he said, that you could apply to sort of racial reconciliation. And all of them are encompassed on a football team. One, having a mutual goal. Another is interdependence. You know, if you're white or black and you're carrying the ball in a football game, and the guy in front of you blocking for you is of the opposite race, you know, you're in good shape. You know, you're in good terms, and you've got a joint something to do together that you're both interested in, and race disappears. The question is whether you block that next tackler. That's the only thing that matters. And I forget the other 2 qualities, but there are 4 qualities in which, on a football team, all of it comes into play. And I remember when my kids were growing up in Columbia, and they played on, and you know, my 2 oldest are barely over 50, and they, I got married when I was 11. but in any event, they were playing Little League baseball, and the team they were on the first year was sort of all white. And the next year, the coach, and he was what many of us might call a redneck, which was all right. I don't use it as a derogatory term, because they're people I know and I think I understand. I grew up with them. But he was a person of limited education and background and so forth. But it was a time of change, and he found some African-American kid who really could throw a baseball. I mean, he was a real good pitcher. Well, suddenly now his parents are coming to the games, and they'd have, you know, a hot dog roast sometime during the season, and suddenly you got all these white parents who had never been engaged in any kind of social interaction with blacks, but suddenly, nor the black parents with whites, but suddenly now they're talking together. And again, it's that sort of breakthrough. And sports actually played a major role in particularly high school sports in terms of easing the change in the South during the racial period. And plus, white Southerners always had this sort of, there was a psychological situation that existed because the region was highly religious, so you had a religion that taught brotherhood and a social structure that didn't, that contrasted with that. So it made it easy for a lot of people that religious background to adjust to changes in the law. And you know, this state had very little in the way of racial conflict. Orangeburg Massacre is excepted, and I wrote that book, but and covered those events when they unfolded. But the fact that it was an exception is still an interesting situation. So, but somewhere things seem to stop, and I think it's really stopped when the Supreme Court changed its direction on issues related to race and started cutting back on school desegregation. And you know, Charlotte had a perfectly working system, massive busing system, and they had this retired district judge who came in one day and said, "Oh no, don't need that anymore. We can stop it all. Go back to neighborhood schools." And you know, and it made a huge difference there. And the Supreme Court has changed. And you know, when you go back historically, you think of Plessy versus Ferguson. But then 2 years later, there's a case that almost no one's ever heard of called Williams versus Mississippi, in which